We're living in a climate emergency, with the effects of the changing climate experienced worldwide. Even if all emissions were stopped tomorrow, it's arguably already too late to prevent a level of climate change that could be disastrous for both humans and the ecosystems we rely on. It's now widely recognised that we need to not only reduce emissions, but actively take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere permanently. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, known as the IPCC, estimates we need to remove around 10 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere each year by 2050. Around 2 billion tonnes is already removed naturally by marshlands, forests and oceans. But to protect these ecosystems, speed is essential, leaving entrepreneurs and scientists in a race against the clock. I'm in the Welsh countryside to visit a company that's using one of nature's most vital processes, photosynthesis, to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at scale. Stephen, hi.
Hi, Reya. Great to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
Welcome to Nellie. This is where the magic happens.
Thanks for having us. What do we have here?
This is our photobioreactor array, and what that means is it's a load of containers that grow microalgae at speed and at scale that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
And why do we have them stacked up here outside?
This is just stage one of a three-stage process that we have. So stage one is the growth of our microalgal biomass, which in the course of its growth removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The system is modular, scalable, and geographically agnostic, which means we can put it pretty much anywhere we like.
Stephen Millburn is a physicist by training, and now what he calls a climate entrepreneur. He started Nellie in 2023. This prototype is part of a newly developed process to create biochar, short for biological charcoal, a stable solid that can store carbon for thousands of years. So just through here?
Yeah, please come on through.
Thank you. Oh wow, what do we have here?
Here is our algae nursery.
So here is where the process begins.
That's exactly right. We keep here our different strains of microalgae and we keep them alive. And that's really all we have to do in the algae nursery is keep them alive at the very start.
And what are you doing to keep them alive?
Just the light, actually, in here, and giving them a little shake now and again. As it reaches a certain density, we remove it and put it in a slightly bigger mini photobioreactor just down there.
Why are you using algae to do this?
We're using algae because it's nature's most efficient way of performing photosynthesis. There's very few organisms on Earth that can convert sunlight and carbon dioxide to biomass in this way.
Microalgae are some of the oldest life forms on Earth. Their origins date back around 3 billion years. As some of the oldest photosynthetic organisms, they've evolved to optimise their ability to capture light and use carbon dioxide in diverse and often challenging environments. In many cases, they're more efficient at converting light energy into biomass due to their high surface area to volume ratio and lack of complex structures like roots and stems. So after you've done this stage, what comes next?
Once it's reached the right level of thickness, of viscosity, we remove it from these flasks and put it into a continual rest mode over here in the slightly larger photobioreactors.
Ah, this is the one with lots of activity. What are you doing to keep this alive?
So we're pumping in ambient air, so just the air around us. That's quite rich in carbon dioxide. And what's happening in the vessels is that carbon dioxide and the light on the side of it is being used by the plants as they grow through photosynthesis. As the photosynthesis occurs in the microalgae, we're releasing clean oxygen back into the air and storing the carbon part of the air that we've used in the biomass itself.
The team at Nellie want to grow algae biomass as fast as possible, so they're helping it thrive with their own technology. Once the algae growth is properly established in this nursery tank, it's ready to go into a much larger version outside.
It's the equivalent of putting a seed in your soil in your garden. So the amount that we take out of there nucleates everything that's happening in the photobioreactor to grow.
Okay, so this is the magic ingredients.
Exactly.
Okay, so what happens after this process?
Yeah, so after we've kept this growing for as long as we like, really, we take an amount of this and put it into each one of the photobioreactor tanks outside. This is our photobioreactor array, and each one of these 1,000-litre containers is a big version of what you saw inside. And what happens in there is an enhanced version of what you saw inside, which is photosynthesis, the microalgae growing using the light that we add, the light that's around, and the air that we pump in.
Before we go on, now's a good time to go back to school with a reminder of exactly how photosynthesis works. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants like micro-algae take water and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and convert them into energy and food. This process happens inside an organelle called a chloroplast. Here, protons from sunlight provide energy by exciting electrons from chlorophyll, a light-absorbing molecule. Carbon dioxide is reduced or receives electrons, and the water becomes oxidized or loses electrons, converting them into sugar and other complex carbohydrates. Oxygen is produced as a byproduct. The sugars are stored for later use, or become part of the algae's biomass, such as cell walls. The conversion of carbon dioxide into organic compounds removes it from the atmosphere, and this process is known as carbon fixation.
So as well as nature, which to be honest does most of the work, our proprietary technology in there is how we make that microalgae go really, really quick. And we do that in a few ways. The first thing is our additive profile. Our additive profile is a mycelium and iron filing mix. And in essence, that's like a bit of mushroom and some tiny iron shavings. In addition to that, because it's more exciting, we have a reactor rod in each one of these. Now that reactor rod has a light source, which supplies the light at the right wavelength for the right strain that's inside. It has a heat source, so we keep it at the right temperature regardless of the weather outside. And it also has an EM field generator. That's an electromagnetic field generator, which uniforms everything in there and helps it to grow quicker again.
And how long does this entire process take?
Takes around about, in fact, it takes exactly 30 days, and everything we do for our R&D experiments, our research and development experiments, is trying to reduce that 30-day cycle.
As a startup in an emerging technology, research and development is a constant part of their work. Ali Scheller is the team's biologist. I understand that you played a part in actually creating this algae mix. What was your role?
So last year we set up a lab, mixed the algae with a different additive in each tube, and then let them be for a month and see which one would grow the most. And then once we found the two that had the highest growth, we tested those two additives in combination, and that turned out to be even faster.
And how do you select the type of algae to use for this process?
We knew that we wanted to have strains that were native to the UK and that wouldn't damage the environment in any way. So we've got spirulina, which is something that you might see in a supermarket as well. It's used for smoothie additives and protein. One is chlorella, which is one of the most common algae species in the world and one of the most hardy and easy to grow. And the third one is Tetraselmis, which is a saltwater algae.
And so after that 30 days, what happens next?
So at the end of the 30 days, the microalgae is starting to die. And as it starts to die, and as it's reached its kind of maximum growth potential, it starts to clump together. It's called flocculation. And that's exactly what we want to see. We don't want to keep it living forever because we need to remove it from these photobioreactors and then drain and dry it.
Can we see that happen?
Oh, sorry, you can't. We're in the middle of a growth cycle, so we're not finished. We're about 15 days in, halfway through. If we take it out now, we're not realising the full potential of the system.
Okay, so you have to wait for this to get to the optimum period of time that it lives and then dies, and from that point on, it's then dried. And how do you do that?
We do it through a vibrational gravity flatbed process. It's quite proprietary because we've got a few new inventions in there which enable us to do it quite efficiently with regards to energy. But it's inside.
Okay, I was going to say I get the sense that you're being a little tight-lipped about how that process works because it's unique to what you're doing here.
We think so, yeah. We haven't found anyone else who's processing microalgae in the way we do to get it to the stage we get it to. So yeah, we're trying to keep a bit of a lid on it for now.
Okay, so after you've taken the liquid out, you've dried it, what's the next stage?
So once it's dehydrated, we end up with a relatively moist biomass, but much, much drier than the liquor from when it comes out of the photobioreactor. We then take that biomass and put it through a pyrolysis system.
And so this is where that then ends up?
Yeah, so once we've drained and dried the very, very wet microalgal biomass, we get a slurry and a kind of biomass that we can then pyrolyze. Pyrolyzing is a system where we heat this biomass up to a very, very high temperature over a very long period, a relatively long period of time, without a flame, in the absence of oxygen, and we do that in these tanks.
Why is that absence of oxygen so important?
If we were to burn all of our biomass or heat our biomass up in the presence of oxygen, we'd release all of the carbon back into the atmosphere.
So what are you left with at the end of that process?
The wonder stuff, biochar. So the output of our whole system is biochar. Would you like to see some?
I'd love to have a look.
So this is a tub of microalgal-based biochar.
This is what we have here. How does it differ to charcoal? Because this just looks like what I have on my barbecue.
Yeah, so it's quite a bit different. So we make this at a higher temperature than when charcoal is produced, but it also has an increased surface area, which helps with the nutrient dispersion and where it goes on the agricultural land. But it's also a more stable form of carbon. So charcoal would decay a bit quicker than biochar does. So we can pretty much guarantee that the carbon that we have removed will stay stored and out of the atmosphere for at least 1,000 years.
What happens after that 1,000 years?
So there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it might actually stay for 10,000 years plus, but the agricultural benefits of it that will then disappear after 1,000 years.
Biochar is a catch-all term describing any organic matter carbonised under high temperatures in the absence of oxygen. There's evidence it was even made and used by ancient Amazonians. Global biochar production is relatively small but growing, with estimates ranging from around 300,000 to 500,000 tonnes annually. Nellie is one of the first to use algae for this process. But what is actually happening here? Pyrolysis typically occurs at temperatures between 300 and 700 degrees Celsius. The lack of oxygen prevents combustion, so the biomass doesn't create and release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. At these high temperatures, the biomass is broken down, and the carbon atoms are bonded in stable hexagonal configurations similar to the structure of graphite. This more condensed structure makes it less reactive to chemical and environmental factors or microbial breakdown, and therefore is highly durable. The amount of carbon dioxide removed from start to finish is calculated by weight. 1 gram of dried algae has used approximately 1.8 grams of carbon dioxide as it grows over its lifetime. This sounds wrong, but the reason the carbon dioxide number is higher is because the oxygen from the CO2 is lost during the process. Over a year, this bioreactor array can produce around 64 tonnes of dried algae, which has removed 115 tonnes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Once all the water is driven off, they end up with 40 tonnes of biochar. Where does this end up? Where does it go?
This particular bucket will go to the farm next door. In fact, all of our biochar is currently used in an agricultural setting here in Wales.
Does that not cause any problems to the quality of the soil and the plants they're growing?
No, quite the opposite. It's in terms of soil structure and water retention. Once it's put on the land, it acts as a really good soil additive, which means it both adds nutrients to the soil in which it's added, and it also adds structure to the land that it's put on.
Nellie has 2 main revenue models: selling this biochar, which makes a fabulous fertiliser and soil additive, and its core purpose, carbon removal and the associated credits. Carbon dioxide removal companies like Nellie are certified for the process of removing and storing CO2. Every step of the task is checked and audited, and once that process is complete, a certificate is issued for every tonne of carbon dioxide removed, called a carbon credit. These can then be sold. But while the idea of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere has been around for a while, to base a business on it is still incredibly new. Apart from biochar, other methods of CDR exist. The first large-scale direct air capture plant was opened in 2021 by Climeworks in Iceland. It can capture 4,000 tonnes of CO2 per year, a huge achievement, but just a fraction of the scale needed to impact climate change. In central London, one of the world's first summits dedicated to carbon dioxide removal is underway.
Welcome back. My name's Ollie. I'm a co-founder here at Unbound, and I hope you've had a great start of the morning. There's been some great conversations already happening.
I'm at Carbon Unbound Europe, a business conference in London, bringing investors, buyers and policymakers together with bright young scientists and entrepreneurs who are staking our future on carbon removals. Ollie, here we are at Carbon Unbound. What led you to start up this event?
I saw the power of bringing together senior leaders to catalyse innovation and investment and essentially change. And I've always been quite passionate about climate change, obviously coming from the millennial generation where we know that things are going in the wrong direction and we need to change things. And I started to become really interested in carbon removal after seeing that basically the world wasn't changing quick enough or decarbonising quick enough. And carbon removal really offers a huge amount of hope as it relates to sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and making sure that the Earth becomes more balanced again.
Investment from industry leaders and grant funding has supported some exciting startups, some of which are being showcased in this pitching session.
We are delivering end of next year our first pilot of 1 ton per day that we can replicate to get to 1 million ton per day, which is the industrial scale in 2031.
Aurélie Gonzalez is an engineer who worked for 10 years decarbonising heavy industry before moving into entrepreneurship after becoming frustrated with the speed of change in the sector.
Why was it important for you to be here at Carbon Unbound?
It shows that, first of all, this is real, this is happening, so there is a kind of traction that you can see from buyers. They are claiming they want to buy carbon credits, they want to see cheap carbon credit, because scalability is just to provide a cheap commodity, because CO2 is a commodity. And I'm seeing this traction when I see buyers saying to other investors, which are my investors, we need this. We see a $1 trillion market in 2050, a $100 billion market in 2030. We need that money put it. So everyone is looking at each other and pushing tensions. And this is very important because if you are alone in your lab in Paris, it's great, things are moving, but you don't see that energy and all those traction.
Here in London, there's cautious optimism, with sales of carbon removal credits slowly gaining momentum.
Last year, in 2023, by October, we had $1.3 billion used in the CDR industry. Now, it's in September, $2.7 billion. So that's about double in just under a year.
Glenn Morley is a responsible carbon removal advocate. He's here for a closed-door event where experienced buyers share expertise to help development of the early market.
What are some of the key challenges to the progression of this sector?
Many of the problems we've had in the carbon market has been due to lack of trust. Historically, we've put a huge importance on standards bodies who are responsible for issuing carbon credits. That process has been shown to have flaws. Methodologies maybe haven't been as rigorous in the nature-based solution space as they needed to be. And I think the emerging carbon removal industry is taking note of that.
Historically, carbon removal credits have been conflated with carbon avoidance credits, which have gained a bad reputation over the last decade. There are accounts of credits issued for not cutting down a tree or planting trees that become part of a monoculture or impact indigenous land. This has all negatively impacted trust in carbon removal as a tool in the climate emergency. There's now a new generation of companies determined to change that.
I think it's the responsibility of the industry to address that head on. We do that by educating people, the general public, on carbon removal, the climate context in which it sits, and making sure that we have systems in place that make sure that carbon removal is used responsibly.
Talk to me about the certification process.
So certification is critical in terms of creating a carbon removal asset. You'll see here today a number of organizations that are putting a lot of work into creating MRV solutions. This is the mechanism, if you like, for measuring that a ton of carbon has been produced and then monitoring that it has been stored in a durable way.
By durable, they mean the carbon is removed from the atmosphere and stored for at least 500 years. But as yet, there's no overarching certification body to ensure this.
We have work being led by the European Union, which is creating a certification framework for most of the major carbon removal pathways, and we have new registries emerging and MRV capabilities which will support that.
Another criticism of the carbon removal industry is that it distracts from actually reducing carbon emissions.
We've gone beyond the point now where just reducing emissions by transitioning to clean technologies will solve our problem. We're way past that. We need carbon removal. That's been recognized by the IPCC, and we need governments to lead. It would be great to have companies compelled to buy a portfolio of carbon removal from an early date and signal that to their citizens and pay for that.
But the market is still voluntary, meaning there's no requirement for emitters to remove carbon, and therefore the development of this market is dependent on forward-thinking companies with net zero commitments. One of the biggest investors is Microsoft, who are backing a range of carbon removal methods, and British Airways has recently signed a multi-year $11 million deal for a portfolio of 33,000 tonnes of carbon removals. This deal makes BA the largest purchaser of carbon removal credits in the UK and the largest global airline purchaser. To scale up fast enough to make a difference, there are calls for a mandatory buying market for governments and companies that continue to emit.
We are all facing the same challenge, which is obviously scalability. Everything works in a lab environment. It just doesn't meet really the energy or the price that we need to go to. So today, everyone has to really decrease energy, decrease price to get to that phase. And to get there, we need good data in the lab, but also good models to convince investors to move forward.
In a typical economic supply and demand situation, carbon removal credits are currently very expensive, as there are not enough companies doing significant carbon removal. So if the sector grows, this will reduce the price, which in turn would increase demand.
But those investors are looking at that on one side, but the other side, if they want to invest, they also want to see buyers and incentives. And buyers cannot be doing that alone. Buyers like Shopify, Klarna, we sold carbon credit to Klarna, for example. They are great, but they need to be supported by the policy. So all the legislation has also to move to help this market to do that switch. Then scalability will happen. Then money will flow through them. But it has to be made not only by buyers, but also by policy and legislation. And we are all waiting and pushing for that. We are all doing lobbying, right?
You strike me as incredibly optimistic, and I'd imagine that confidence is a necessity given the sector you're working in.
As an entrepreneur, or when you want to solve that big problem, you always need to be extremely positive about things, otherwise you would never start anything. And we have to be positive because in any case, we have no choice. Planet is burning. So we have to be optimistic on the fact that we are going to make it on time. We have tools. We have an entire industry. We know how to scale up industries. We did that for all the past industries, so it's something we can do. So yes, I'm obviously optimistic as a CEO of a startup.
Back in Wales, Nellie plans to expand into Cardiff's former industrial sites with an installation that will remove at least 50,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. Stephen hopes his business will be able to utilise legacy skills in the area, drawing on the country's history of heavy industry, coal and steel, which has been in decline for generations.
I'm from Sunderland in the northeast of England, which socioeconomically is it's a post-industrial landscape really, so old industries in mining and shipbuilding. My granddad was a coal miner. My mum was a taxi driver. My mum and dad were both taxi drivers. I think from that, there's a certain know-how or a drive in people from working class backgrounds to get stuff done. And I'd like to think that's what we're doing here at Nellie. Is it's not just a lab-based project. It's not just a nice idea. It's something that's actually working. It's in operation now. It's doing what it should be doing, and it's doing it in a practical way.
Stephen's dream isn't just to remove carbon, but also to create jobs in areas currently threatened by the energy transition. They've recently stationed a portable unit at a steelworks. It's not quite point source capture, but more a way of sharing their work with local communities.
Hey, Andrew. This all looks really impressive, but does it actually serve any purpose?
Yes, it does. So these tubes are actually capturing carbon right now as the micro-algae is growing. It's just a very small photobioreactor, which means that we could take it anywhere, really. As long as you can attach it to the back of the truck, we could take it there for, commercial purposes or to kind of just show it off.
Where's this just been? Where's it come back from?
Yeah, it just came back from a steel plant where it performed better than we expected it to.
How
which was
so?
exciting. It grew, well, there's two different kinds of microalgae in here, which is Tetraselmis and spirulina. So they grew quicker than we were expecting them to. They had a faster rate than we were expecting them to. So there's way more biomass in these tanks than we were expecting it to, which means that it captured more carbon in that 30-day cycle that it was there. So that's really exciting.
And so this actually gives you an opportunity to learn here too?
Exactly, because each location is going to have different types of gases in the air, right? So it's interesting to learn what happens in a different place with different kinds of air quality, right? Because right here, obviously, it's going to be different than at the steel plant. So it's going to perform differently based on a different environment.
The next location for the portable unit is a school, where it will help educate engineers of the future.
Why does the world need carbon capture?
You can't argue at the point that we're at an inflection point in the climate crisis that we're probably somewhat past the tipping point. Obviously, I'm concerned with the success of our business and what we're building here, but really when it boils down to it, as long as 1, 2, 3, or a handful of people do end up doing it at scale, then we will hopefully avoid the worst of the climate crisis, especially if we get it deployed now. It's not it needs to be done in the next 10 years, it needs to be done now.
The logistics of removing carbon from the atmosphere on a scale that would mitigate climate change is mind-boggling. It means creating an industry bigger than coal and steel combined. But if we think of the Industrial Revolution, which started this crisis, and size of the economy now, it's not really out of the question. As Aurélie says, it needs the will of governments and investors to get behind legitimate and sustainable carbon removal projects. And Stephen is also right. There's no time to waste, because in the end, it's not just the planet we're saving, it's ourselves.